Morning. It's good to see everybody here this morning. You might take out your Bibles and open them to the book of Ecclesiastes. The book of Ecclesiastes chapter 4 is where we're going to be beginning this morning. And I want to talk about being very intentional in building the community that we surround ourselves. And what I mean by community in this context is the group of people that we're turning to, that we're depending on, that we're spending our time with. We might call them friends, we might call them our family in a broad sense, those people who have a great influence on our lives every day, the people that help us as we're seeking help on life's journey. Before I get into that, I want to mention something. Chris and I have been talking a lot about when are we going to get back to Bible class and how are we going to work that out. And I know there's a variety of ideas about how we ought to do that. I'm sure some people are ready. I'm sure some people are nowhere near ready. And so what we're looking at is starting back the second quarter and trying to just pick up. And this is not written in stone. We're gonna watch the situation. But as of right now, our hope is to be able to just start at the beginning of the second quarter, go back to our normal Bible classes. And there's a host of reasons for that. And I tell you what, if you're curious about those, why don't you come talk to Chris or I individually, because I promise you I won't say enough up here to answer your questions and it'll just create chaos. So I don't want to do that. So if you have questions about why that's what we've decided, please come let us know. If you have concerns about that, if you have some ideas you think might help us, we are all ears. I won't promise we'll do everything you suggest, but we're just two people. We'd love to hear what you think. But right now we're trying to, there's no way we're going to satisfy everybody. We realize that. So we're trying to take as much into account as we possibly can. Along those lines, if you're willing to start teaching in the second quarter, we'd love to hear from you. As of now, what we're kind of thinking about doing is just taking the list from last year and taking the teachers from the first quarter and asking you if you would mind teaching in the second quarter. So if you're a teacher, you might look at that list. It's back there in the room behind the foyer, whatever we call that room, where the bulletin board is. See if your name's on there. If you're comfortable, please let us know. If you don't think you'll be comfortable, please let us know. We don't want to force anybody into doing anything they're not ready to do, but we'd like to start getting back to as close to normal as we can. I don't know how much our children, especially our young children, are getting out of a Wednesday night class on the book of Revelation right now. I hope that some of our not so young children and adults are getting something out of it, but I'm sure the very young are not getting anything out of it. We need to start teaching them on their level as soon as we can. So that's our plan as of now. Chris, have I said all that right? Okay. So if you have questions about why, please come talk to us. And I mean that. We would love to hear from you. And we'll give you the best answers we've got right now. We're going to keep monitoring the situation both in the community and in our congregation and try to do what's best both spiritually and physically to the best of our ability for everyone here. But right now, that's the intent. And again, if that changes, we'll be sure to let you know as quickly as possible what we're looking at. So the idea of friends, associates, those who are in our close circle is one that's actually spoken of quite a bit in our Bibles. And as a matter of fact, Ecclesiastes chapter 4 speaks to us about it and tells us that there's really great value in companionship. The reality is we're not meant to be alone, and you can go back to Genesis and find that, can't you? From the very, very beginning, God said it's not good for man to be alone. There needed to be some sort of companionship. We were made to be relational beings. We are created to be a part of a community, a body, a family, whatever language you would like to use. And I think in some senses, in this world, the highest purpose we can achieve is to become a functional part of a whole, especially if we're talking about something like the local church, the body of Christ, or the family as God has designed it. We need to join with others in order to grow as we ought spiritually. We need to join with others in order to be able to serve. Notice what the writer says in Ecclesiastes chapter 4. He says, 2 are better than 1, because they have a good return for their labor. For if either of them falls, the one will lift up his companion, but woe to the one who falls when there is not another to lift him up. Furthermore, if two lie down together, they keep warm. But how can one be warm alone? And if one can overpower him who is alone two can resist him. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly torn apart. He uses these very practical concepts and examples to highlight the value of us seeking out and finding good companionship. And I love how he begins with 2 and moves to 3, letting us know that there's value in more than one close associate, that there ought to be a movement in this as we find ourselves sharing a life and sharing a walk with more and more people throughout our life. But it's important, I want to point this out, it's really the point of our lesson this morning. It's important that we are intentional about this. I think a lot of times our friends become kind of acquaintances of convenience, right? They're the people we see at work. Maybe they're the people that are close to our age. Maybe they're people that have similar interests and likes in this world. And I understand that. It makes it easy to associate with someone when you have something in common. I wonder if we don't sometimes kind of overvalue the physical commonalities and undervalue the spiritual commonalities. And when we do that, it's to our detriment. Proverbs 27:17, very familiar passage. Iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. You know, it's the idea of preparation, isn't it? We're able to help one another be prepared. The question is to do what? To do what? You know, I know when I was much younger, that seemed to be my emphasis. I wanted to find people my age that liked the things that I liked and spend my time with them. And a lot of times what I found out was they were not very adept at helping me in my spiritual growth. Oh, we could get better at doing certain things and we could enjoy doing certain things, whatever it was, nothing wrong with most of them. But at the same time, there was often a pull away from the spiritual things, away from the growth that I should have been experiencing, where if I'd been putting my emphasis on finding people who had the same spiritual goals and who were seeking the same reward, age is much less of a factor all of a sudden. And then I have someone I can depend on and I can lean on. So we can see, peer pressure. I put this phrase up here because we often use it as a negative thing, right? Especially when we're talking to our young people, you need to be aware of peer pressure. You need to resist peer pressure. And of course, what we're talking about is the peer pressure that would lead you to do things that are sinful, the peer pressure that would lead you to do things that are harmful, that might lead you further away from the Lord, from that which is good for you. Brother, peer pressure is not a bad thing. Depends on the pressure we're receiving. I think I've shared with you, when I was about 12, we moved to Lafayette, Georgia. There was a guy there named Jason Ledford. And we became just best friends. And we got in a little bit of trouble with one another. We were sometimes a bit mischievous and a little rambunctious from time to time. But I tell you, as we got into high school, I couldn't have had a better friend. See, he was a member of the church. We were baptized pretty close to the same amount of time, in the same time frame. We were both overall seeking the same thing. We had the same faith, or very, very similar principles that our faith was built upon. And we knew, right? I knew that if I went too far, my friend Jason Ledford was going to go tell my mama. And I was going to get in trouble because she'd tell my daddy. And of course, I was going to do the same thing for him. And so there was this positive peer pressure. Don't go down that path. And I'll be honest with you, it helped me out a lot with the negative peer pressure that we all experience. And by the way, that's not just something young people experience. Every one of us deal with peer pressure of some sort or some kind in the life that we live, in the world that we're in. What are we choosing? Are we choosing to surround ourselves with people who will push us in the right direction? Or are we just seeking out people that will give us affirmation for our shortcomings and our faults? And brother, that's not the world's fault. That's mine. What have I chosen? Where have I turned? What I need to be doing is seeking out positive peer pressure and be very intentional about who I'm spending my time with. Proverbs 27:6, faithful are the wounds of a friend, but deceitful are the kisses of an enemy. There's a phrase that goes around, and I'm going to use it, and I'm not going to say anybody is this, but I think it kind of makes the point. We hear it said about this generation that's kind of in college right now, and I don't know that it's so unique as we want to pretend it is to this group of young people, but we call them snowflakes sometimes, right? Because it seems like anything that doesn't go their way, they just kind of melt down. The idea that that's a new thing, I think is preposterous and a little bit ridiculous. Maybe it gets a little more airtime than it ever has. But you know, that's something we need to be very careful about, is to make sure that we're not snowflakes, that we're not turning away people who love us and care for us and are concerned about our spiritual well-being because they may say something to us we don't like every now and then. If you've got friends that never tell you you're wrong, you do not have friends. You have associates. You have people you go have fun with, but you don't have friends, not in the biblical concept of friendship. If the people you're surrounding yourself are just constantly saying, yes, what you're doing is right, yes, keep going, yes, enjoy that, you need to really examine your own life. What is it that you're looking for? You know, growth is always a difficult process. And we need to seek out people who will encourage us to undergo that process. So I want to talk about 3 groups of people that we probably should be looking for. Let me take that probably out of there. We should be looking for in our lives. And I tell you, the younger we start doing this, the better. And so, young people, I hope you'll really listen to me. Not so young people, I think this applies to you as well. Notice how I left myself out of both groups there. This applies to everyone in the room. I think we ought to be looking at our lives and thinking about this. First of all, turn over with me, if you would, to Exodus chapter 17. Exodus chapter 17. We need to be seeking out what I'm going to call a mentor. And what I mean by that is someone who is willing to offer some guidance. This may need to be someone a little bit older than we are. Maybe someone who's been where we're at right now. They've had these life experiences and maybe they've messed them up, but they've got some perspective that we don't have. And as a result of that, they're able to help us out. They're able to do things like teach us how to bear the burden of responsibility. I do think that's something that we're seeing more and more in our society today, is people don't want to bear responsibility. I think one of the biggest epidemics we have in our country today is just the lack of men becoming men. And I don't mean to exclude the women in this, because I think women play a role in this, but men failing to become men because we don't want to take on responsibility. We would rather live in mom and dad's basement until we're 30 or 35 because, hey, I can sit down there and play video games all day and not really have to do anything. And so we're putting the women in our society in a very awkward, difficult position simply because men aren't growing as they ought to grow. And so what we need to do, men and women alike, we need to find someone who can mentor us, who can help us. You know, Exodus chapter 17 is an interesting place that you find Moses and Joshua. And I really think you see this relationship of the mentor and the mentee, if you will, developed in this relationship between Moses and Joshua. Familiar passage. They're fighting a battle with Amalek. And of course, God's given them this really interesting battle plan, right? God, how are we going to win this battle? How do you want us to go out? How do you want the army to arrange itself? Moses, get on a hill and hold your hands up. As long as you do, you'll win. Okay. Well, if Moses is on the hill holding his hands up, who's leading the army? Well, he picks this young man named Joshua. Notice verse 9. So Moses said to Joshua, choose men for us and go out and fight against Amalek. Tomorrow I will station myself on the top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand. I wonder what that must have felt like to Joshua. Joshua's standing here, and we don't know a whole lot about him before this, but here he is, and Moses, the leader of Israel, picks him to lead the armies of Israel. Joshua's not a general. Joshua is a freed slave who months ago was making mud bricks for the Egyptians. And now there's this warlike people who were known for their viciousness, who have been practicing the art of war for quite some time. And Moses says, Joshua, I want you to be the one that leads the people out there. You know, I wonder what that meant to Joshua. I'm sure in the moment it was unnerving. But in the days to come, to realize that Moses, in his leadership position, had faith and had trust in him. You can see how that worked to build Joshua for the future that was in store for him. Notice verse 13, Joshua overwhelmed Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. Then the Lord said to Moses, write this in a book as a memorial to recite it to Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. And so here we have this constant reminder. And what a wonderful thing for a mentor to do for a young protege. Put them in a position where they have to stretch a little bit, where they have to take some responsibility, help them to succeed in that, and then constantly be able to build their confidence, not with flattery, not with platitudes, but with a reminder of this success. In every moment that Joshua later on felt like he couldn't or might fail, he had this moment, wait a minute, I am capable. I am capable, and I've shown that, not in a boastful way, but just in a reality. What a beautiful thing to do for a younger person that you're trying to help. And people, this is the kind of thing, especially young people, we ought to be looking for. It's not hard to find someone who will say nice things to young people. It's a little more difficult to find someone who will put young people in a position to prove those nice things. And brethren, that's what we need. That's what we need to be doing for our young people. And that's what our young people need to be seeking out. But I don't think that stops with youth. I think those of us that are in middle age can be seeking it, and I think every one of us can be looking at those who've gone before us and be seeking out that same sort of mentorship. A mentor helps us adjust our perspective from time to time, especially when we need it. I want you to notice Exodus chapter 32. We know the story. Moses is up on the mountain receiving the law. Joshua's just a little way down the mountain waiting on him to come back. They've been gone for quite some time, and all sorts of chaos is breaking out at the foot of the mountain, isn't it? Children of Israel have come to Aaron. We don't know what happened to Moses. Biggest lie ever told in the Bible. The elders of Israel, the sons of Aaron, Aaron himself, had all been up on that mountain. They had all sat at the feet of God. God had told them exactly what was going on. The cloud was still there. They knew exactly where Moses was. They didn't know when he was coming back. But he hadn't abandoned them, nor had God. They could visibly see that God had not abandoned him. Aaron, we don't know what's happening. We don't know where Moses went. We don't know if he's coming back. How about you make us a God we can worship? Aaron says, okay, give me all the gold you've got. He boils it down, makes a golden calf, says, Israel, this is the God that brought you out of Egypt. Now, he knew it wasn't. They knew it wasn't, but what did they do? They fall down and they start worshiping that calf. They rise up and play. You do a little research on that Hebrew term, it's pretty disgusting what happens after they bow down to that calf. They just fall into all the idolatrous, polytheistic religion that they'd have been exposed to in Egypt in all of its worst forms. And it made quite a noise. Joshua hears that noise in Exodus chapter 32, and he calls out to Moses about it. Verse 17, now when Joshua heard the sound of the people as they shouted, he said to Moses, there's a sound of war in the camp. But he said it is not the sound of the cry of triumph, nor is it the sound of the cry of defeat, but the sound of singing I hear. You know, Joshua's the captain of the army. Joshua thinks there's an invasion. Joshua's saying, Moses, we got to get down there. We got to fight. We got to go to war. But I don't really understand what's going on. You know, it's Moses that kind of helps him figure out what's really happening. It's Moses that tells him who he's going to have to go and fight. It's Moses who sends him out to punish the people. It's Moses who corrects his perspective. Numbers chapter 11, verse 28, Joshua comes to Moses. There are two men going throughout the camp of Israel prophesying, and Joshua feels very protective towards Moses. So he goes to Moses, he calls these men out by name, he's waiting on instruction. What should we go do? And once again, his mentor, Moses, kind of corrects his perspective a little bit. See, Joshua sees this as someone trying to take the glory away from Moses. Moses says, if they're glorifying God, why would we stop them? See, that little bit of adjustment, that little bit of a different way of looking things, that little bit of reframing, I'm finding it's more and more valuable in my life as I reach out to people who can help me with my trials. A lot of times what I find out is if I reframe them a little bit, I'm not in a trial. I've created a problem, right? I think we do that a lot when we're young. We don't have the perspective. We don't have enough experience. We haven't seen the movie before, and we begin to assume certain things. What a wonderful blessing to have someone who can sit down with you and put their arm on your shoulder and say, let's think about this a little differently. And listen to them. Listen to them. Let them help you in the way that they're trying to help you. A mentor encourages humility even through their own failures. Numbers chapter 20, Moses makes a tremendous mistake, doesn't he? He makes a tremendous mistake taking the glory of God upon himself as he strikes the rock that he was supposed to speak to. It says that he was providing water for the nation of Israel, loses his place in the promised land. But he gets up after that and he continues to serve. He continues to work. He continues to lead. As a matter of fact, he takes that grumbling, mumbling group of people right to the very border of the promised land. What a lesson for Joshua. Good leaders don't have to be perfect. Matter of fact, they won't be. What they do need to be is humble. And here Moses is, and he's shaping and preparing Joshua to take the children of Israel across the river Jordan. And what does he show him but this wonderful example of humility so that he can move forward and be the leader that he ought to be. These are the types of things that we find when we find a good mentor. When someone says, I want one, where are they? They're not on Amazon. You're going to have to look a little harder, right? I'm going to have to go where they are. Someone says, well, that was very helpful. Thank you very much. Well, let me help you out. If you're a young person, let me help you out. And I think if you're a little older, you'll see how this applies. But I think there's a tendency, I even see it here in our auditorium, there's a tendency for us to kind of associate based on age group and then family group. And let me tell you, that could prevent you from finding the mentor that may be sitting right here in this room who could help you. You need to go where they are. If you're 15, don't look for a 15-year-old mentor. You need a 30-year-old, a 35-year-old, a 40-year-old. They're in this room. Reach out to them. Go where they are. What do I mean? Go speak to them. Go let them know that you're aware that they are here and that you'd like a little bit of their attention. And you don't have to beg for it. Go shake their hand. Make sure that you go and speak to them after services. Let them know that you're aware that they're here and you might be receptive to their help. Something I'm learning the older I get, the greatest challenge to helping people, especially those who are younger than you, is the feeling that they don't want the help. And young people, you can help us older people with that by just reaching out a little bit. Now, it doesn't absolve those of us who are older of our responsibility. The Bible doesn't tell the older men and women of a church to help the younger men and women when they want it. No, our job's to be there for them, be in their ear a little bit, guide them, direct them. But if I'm looking for a mentor, I need to reach out. I need to go associate with people more mature than myself. I need to have a willing spirit. I need to be open to listen to others and glean from their advice. You know, as I kind of think back on my life, I think there were some very specific times where some wise, mature people wanted to guide me and help me and maybe mentor me, and I was just too arrogant to listen. I don't think there's a better word for it either, at least not in my case. I was just too arrogant to listen. I mean, after all, what does somebody who's 65 know about my life at 19? A whole bunch. A whole bunch. Oh, but they don't even know how to use their iPhone. Yeah, life may not be about your iPhone or what happened on TikTok or whatever it is we're using today. Life might be about some things that are far more essential than the latest trends and fads and fashions and technologies. Life might be about the very things that they could help you with if you would be willing to listen. So demonstrate that willing spirit. Be open to listen. Be open to their advice. Now, let me tell you something I've learned is speaking to older people, sitting and listening to the stories that they will tell you. Man, there's a few people in this auditorium, I just love to sit and listen to them talk. And it's not that they're necessarily opening up their Bible and preaching from their Bible. They're just talking about their life. They're just talking about how they live. Do y'all remember a few years ago we had a gentleman named Leon Goff come here and hold a gospel meeting for us? And Leon's in his 80s. And I tell you, that was the best week I've had in a long time. I got to sit with Leon. Y'all don't get the private show I got. I got to sit with Leon in private and talk. And I asked him Bible questions, and we talked about those sorts of things. But then I just tried to get him talking about his life. And he was talking to me about what it was like kind of growing up in a time when they rode a wagon to church because he lived in such a rural place, and he was telling me about how even when it was raining, his dad would go out there and hitch up that team, and his mom would get in the wagon, and all the kids, and there was more than 3 or 4 of them, they'd all get in the wagon, and they'd ride the whatever miles it was, 10 miles or so, and they'd get to church sopping wet. But you know where they did? They went and worshiped God. Boy, that struck me. That struck me. Am I giving the proper emphasis to my relationship with God? Am I willing to endure just a little bit of hardship? I don't know about you guys. I haven't had any experience like that. I had to change a tire one time on the way to preach. I got a little damp, but I had a heater when I got back in. You know, those stories are not just stories. They're not just intended to make young people feel insufficient. I think what happens is in those stories, we learn those principles from a simpler time that is so easy for us to overlook in this complicated day and age in which we live. And finally, we need to begin the journey. You know, I've seen this. You can actually go online and hire a mentor. And in my mind, and maybe I'm wrong, but in my mind, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard of. Because it seems to me like these relationships are organic and they're not coerced. I don't read in Exodus where Joshua put in an application to be Moses' right-hand man. It seems like Moses saw something in a young man and reached out to him and developed a relationship, and Joshua reciprocated, kind of the way friendships typically evolve. And so there was a natural component to this. And it was a relationship of shared interest. Maybe not in everything, but they were both concerned about Israel, and they were both concerned about serving God, and there was a mutual respect there. And it allowed them to have this successful relationship that allows Joshua to become one of the great leaders in the history of Israel. We need friends and encouragers. And again, I think we need the biblical concept of friends, not the worldly concept of friends. The worldly concept of a friend is just somebody to go out and to have fun with. And listen, I get the value in that, and there is value in that, but I need to be seeking far more than that if I'm going to find those who I can have in my life and surround myself with, who will help me on this walk, this journey through life. I'm over in Acts chapter 9. Of course, Acts chapter 9, Saul of where did he come from? Saul, who became Paul, was converted, and he was having a hard time. It's hard to imagine a new Christian having a harder time than Saul had. You know, he's in Antioch, and he gets run out of Antioch, and he goes to Jerusalem, and he struggles in Jerusalem. As a matter of fact, he wasn't in Antioch, he was in Damascus. He'll be in Antioch later on. He's in Damascus, and people are going to try to kill him, and they have to sneak him out of town in the middle of the night, letting him down off of a wall. He comes to Jerusalem, verse 26. When he came to Jerusalem, he was trying to associate with the disciples, but they were all afraid of him, not believing that he was a disciple. Now, I certainly understand their hesitation, don't you? Last time he was in Jerusalem, he was beating Christians and putting them in jail, and now he comes back and he says, hey, can I join the local church? I think Chris and I might look at that guy sideways a couple of times and say, wait a minute, why? Look at verse 27. But Barnabas took hold of him and brought him to the apostles and described to them how he had seen the Lord on the road and that he had talked to him and how at Damascus he had spoken out boldly in the name of Jesus. What a moment in the life of Saul. There's so many amazing things that the Apostle Paul does in his various journeys, the letters that he writes for us. But I don't know, as far as his spiritual development, that there was a bigger moment in his life besides seeing Jesus on the road to Damascus than when Barnabas stood up for him and said, hang on, let me tell you who this man's become. See, here's this man who was loyal to him even when loyalty was hard. You think it was an easy thing for Barnabas to go up there and say, hey, I've got it all wrong? Barnabas was in that original Jerusalem church that was persecuted by Saul. In all likelihood, Barnabas had friends and associates, brothers and sisters in Christ who had been harmed by that persecution. He had everything to lose and nothing to gain by doing this, and yet what does he do? He goes and he stands beside his friend in order to help him, in order to benefit him, in order to aid him in his spiritual development. That's exactly what we need, are people who are supportive to us, especially in difficult times. So verse 28, Saul was with them, moving about freely in Jerusalem, speaking out boldly in the name of the Lord, and he was talking and arguing with the Hellenistic Jews, but they were attempting to put him to death. I'm sorry, somewhere along here I decided preaching's not for me, right? I've been run out of town once with death threats. The church didn't want me in it when I got somewhere else, and now I'm finally getting to work for the Lord again, and people are trying to kill me again. Maybe I'm done. It gets so bad, verse 30, when the brethren learned of it, they brought him down to Caesarea and sent him away to Tarsus. So for the second time, the brethren say, it's too dangerous for you to be here. Let me ask you, what happens to you when you get to Tarsus? That's where Saul was from, by the way. What happens to you when you get to Tarsus? How many of us just kind of sit there and give up? How many of us go and just have this very dark moment? I don't know that that's not what happens to Saul. I don't know that it's what does happen, but I know this. He wasn't forgotten. Go over to Acts chapter 11. Acts chapter 11, those who were scattered because of persecution in Jerusalem, they've gone out into all the world, and they're preaching and teaching the gospel, and they're kind of moving into these Gentile regions more and more. And finally we find they're in Antioch. And here's Barnabas. Verse 22, the news about them reached the ears of the church at Jerusalem, and they sent Barnabas off to Antioch. So there's this group of Christians that's growing and building a congregation there. They need some help, so here goes Barnabas. Then when he arrived and witnessed the grace of God, he rejoiced and began to encourage them all with resolute heart to remain true to the Lord, for he was a good man, and full of the Holy Spirit and of faith, and considerable numbers were brought to the Lord. There's an explosion, isn't there, in Antioch of conversions. And Barnabas apparently looks around and says, I need some help. Where will I go? And he left for Tarsus to look for Saul. And when he had found him, he brought him to Antioch, and for an entire year they met with the church and taught considerable numbers, and the disciples were first called Christians in Antioch. Well, you talk about support. Barnabas for the second time now, and here he is in this tender situation, right? You've got Gentiles coming into the church. It's a fledgling church. You know, the majority of the people that are in it are brand new Christians. And I tell you, decision making at that point is very important, because you can turn that thing the wrong way just like that. And what does Barnabas say? I need Saul. I need Paul to be here, and I need his help, and he needs to be here. He needs my help. And so he goes and he finds him and he brings him back and he gives him this opportunity. Of course, the rest is history concerning the growth of Paul. Barnabas was a friend who gave to Paul. And from what I can tell, had zero expectation of anything in return. He was simply serving. Proverbs 18:24 says, a man of too many friends comes to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. And I think that's a concept that takes a little while to figure out, right? I know when we're young, I know when I was in school, I wanted to have as many so-called friends as I could have. There was some concept of popularity went with that. It seemed like it made your life easier. The older I've gotten, the more I've realized that's just not true. A friend is a rare thing, a true friend. A friend, an encourager, someone who is loyal, someone who is sacrificial, someone who puts your needs and interests first. That is a rare and difficult thing to find. And when we find it, we ought to cherish it. We should look for it. And we should appreciate it when we find it. Well, again, they're not on Amazon. So how do I find them? Let's look among God's people. Not that everyone who's a member of a local church is perfect or selfless or really a Barnabas, but that's where I will find them. I won't find them in the world. Someone says, oh, I've got sacrificial friends in the world. Do you? Do you have people in the world who are willing to give up something to help you go to heaven? To call themselves your friend? You know, I think you really need to think about that. I think that's a question we really need to ask of ourselves. Do we have the kind of friends from the world that we can find in a local church? Not just somebody who'll come help us move, although that seems to be a church service that we offer here. What I'm talking about is someone who will be there for you in the middle of the night when things aren't going your way, and they're going to come over, and they're not going to bring some worldly enticement with them to help you get through it. They're going to come and pray with you. And they're going to come and offer you their spiritual strength and help and guidance. Maybe they can or can't deal with the actual situation, but they can lead you through it with your faith intact. Friends, you won't find that in the world. You find that among God's people. And that's where we need to be seeking. It's where we need to be looking. We need to be honest and authentic. You know, sometimes finding friends is a hard thing because our own insecurities kind of get in the way, right? And so, you know, it's like those movies you watch every now and then. There's this somebody and they're trying to reach out in the world and everybody's giving them this advice, be yourself. And then someone says, well, maybe not you, you know. No, you got to be yourself. And what I mean by that is you've got to be authentic. You know, it's hard to find friends who can help us when we're spending all of our time hiding what we need help with and pretending to be someone that we're not. And what happens, and we've all been around those people, as time goes on, we realize, wait a minute, they're not opening up, they're not accepting help, they're not looking for true friendship. They're keeping me at arm's length. And that becomes a very, very hard thing to deal with. And the more I do that, the more I'm going to look around and realize I'm alone. And I don't have those kinds of friends. Oh, I may have somebody I can go fishing with. But I don't have people I can depend on. Because I haven't been honest with them. I haven't been myself. I haven't let them see who I am. And I understand that can be a scary proposition for us. But brethren, that's how we find the kind of friends that we need. That friend who sticks closer than a brother. And maybe the easiest way to do this is just go be a friend. Just open ourselves up to be the helper. To be the Barnabas. To be there for other people, to be loyal to them, to give what they need without any expectation in return. Because, brother, if we do that enough, we'll find someone that reciprocates. We'll find those who will care about us, who will help us, who will serve us as we work to serve them. Last but not least, we need to find someone who help hold us accountable. I won't take the time to read 2 Samuel chapter 12. You know the story as well as I do. David's committed adultery with Bathsheba. He's murdered her husband to cover this up. And there's this period of time where he's just being rebellious to the Lord, hard in his heart and refusing to repent. And finally Nathan is sent to him, and Nathan tells him the story, doesn't he, about the rich man and the poor man with the one ewe lamb that he loves, and how the rich man takes it, slaughters it for a feast. Well, David's incensed, isn't he? What does Nathan say? Oh, David says that man ought to be put to death. And Nathan says, and I think he said it exactly how it's in the King James Version, by the way, "Thou art the man." Do you have somebody like that in your life? Do you have somebody in your life who is courageous enough and loves you enough to call you out? Or have you spent a lot of time making sure you don't have someone in your life who has that courage and that willingness? Brethren, we all need that person. We need that person who tells us the truth, not just about everyone and everything else, that person who will tell us the truth about ourselves. Not that that's going to be fun or pleasant or comfortable. As a matter of fact, it's probably not going to be any of those things. But how courageous was Nathan? You know, sometimes we don't want to be an accountability partner because we're afraid of what we'll lose. But friends, we don't stand to lose anything near what Nathan stood to lose. I mean, in the mood that David had been in, the attitude that he had demonstrated, would anybody here be surprised if 2 Samuel 12 ended up with the execution of Nathan? He'd already told Joab, if you say a word about it, I'll kill you too. And yet Nathan stood before him. Thou art the man. And it's hard to imagine David having changed, having repented, if that was not the case. But here's Nathan, and Nathan knows something about David, and this is what we need. We need to allow these people to get very close to us, because Nathan knew David's weaknesses, and he knew when they were winning. David struggled with pride, didn't he? David got a little full of himself every now and then. Remember when he came across a man named Nabal, and Nabal said, I'm not feeding you and I'm not feeding your men. And David looks around and says, I'm the anointed of the Lord and you won't feed me? How about I just kill you? Not just you, but all your people, hundreds of people. That's pride talking, isn't it? As a matter of fact, if it hadn't been for Nabal's wife, he would have ended up doing just that, but she talked him out of it. Nathan knew who David was. He knew his weaknesses, and he was able to look at David and see when they were winning. But not only that, he knew how to speak to David in such a way as to bring that out. You know, we call this the Nathan principle. But I want you to understand the Nathan principle is not just using parables. The Nathan principle is understanding the person. It's understanding how to speak to that person. It's understanding the individual that you're trying to help. One of the reasons it's so important for all of us in a local church to have personal relationships one with another. That's how we learn to hold each other accountable. Which, by the way, is one of the primary works we have with one another in the local church. Is to provide this kind of accountability. And so we need to find someone who can help us with that. And we need someone who has a little bit of discernment. I think sometimes we like to pick our accountability partner very, very carefully. I've always liked going to the gym, and I've always liked going to the gym with somebody, but I've always been really, I messed up this last time, it's ruined my life, but up until now, I would find someone that I knew didn't really want to go, so they could hold me accountable, and that worked out great. I got to sleep in late almost every day, right? Because I knew they weren't going to be there. And so you very carefully pick out that accountability partner. Now I go with the guy, that's all he wants to do. And you pick out an accountability partner, and you pick out someone who's not going to be there. You pick out someone who's not going to be responsible. You pick out someone who doesn't have the discernment to hear through your excuses. You don't have an accountability partner. You need that person who's willing to listen to you and say, wait a minute. I've heard this excuse before. Let's don't go down this road. Let's be honest. Let's look in our heart. Let's see what's really going on. And let's make some correction. Brethren, if we'll put these kinds of people in our life, if we'll seek these kinds of people out, our spiritual walk will become far easier. And by the way, and this is where it gets so hard, isn't it? It's got to be someone whose opinion matters to you. And sometimes, again, we don't want to share ourselves with other people. We don't want the people who are close to us to see us for who we really are. We don't want the people who we respect immensely to see us in our weaker moments. But brother, that's exactly who can help us. And that's exactly what they have to see to be of help. And if we're not willing to allow that to happen, brother, how do we improve? How do we grow? How do we take advantage of one of the greatest gifts that God has given His people? The local church and our brothers and sisters in Christ. If we're too concerned that someone might say we were wrong, to be able to listen to those that help, we are putting a major obstacle in our own path on the walk to heaven. We need to be careful. Well, how do I find one of these people? I need someone who's honest. And I don't just mean not deceitful, okay? What I'm talking about is I need the kind of person who will look me in the eye and say, you may not like what I'm about to say, but I need to say it. I need to find the kind of person who's too honest to allow their emotions to prevent them from helping me. I need to turn to people who have demonstrated a genuine care for others. And brother, care is a difficult thing for us to express genuinely because there's some things we can do that will seem to demonstrate care and concern, but that are actually so simple and so easy, it doesn't go very deep. And, you know, we ought to do those things. But who are the people that are really there? Who are the people that really care? Who are the people who are willing to do whatever is necessary? We need to be seeking those people out. And maybe we start with the friends we already have. Right? Would it hurt us to encourage our friends to be more open with us? How about this? You can tell me. You know, when I'm talking to people sometimes, and maybe they've got a problem, and they've kind of laid out their problem, and it kind of always works this way, right? You hear their problem, and there's two sides to it. There's the side they probably can't do anything about. Maybe it's maybe it's just the world we live in, or maybe it's just the other person in the relationship, and there's probably not much they can do to control that. Then there's the other side, right? The other side is, your fault, your problem. The thing you can change, you can do. And what we typically want to hear when we go talk to somebody is about all this other stuff. Like, how do I fix this other person? You don't. And so I've gotten to where I just look people in the eye and I say, listen, I can tell you one of two things. One of them you're probably going to like, one of them you aren't. Which one you want to hear? I'll let you make up your mind. But if you tell me you want to hear the one you think you might not like, I'm going to tell you the truth. I'm going to tell you exactly what I think and exactly what I've heard. And I want to do that with love and with grace. But there doesn't need to be a lot of sugar in it. It needs to be truth. And we need to be encouraging our friends to speak to us that way. If my closest friends are afraid to tell the truth to me, then I need to change. I need to open my heart. I need to swallow my pride. And I need to realize the help that's out there for me so that I can come closer to the Lord. Well, I appreciate your attention. You listened very well this morning. I think these are important things, maybe not quite the normal subjects that we might deal with in a Sunday morning lesson, but I think very practical and very useful. Again, not just for our young people, but for all of us. And here's why I say that. Because we want heaven to be our home. And not a one of us will get there by ourselves. Every one of us is going to need help. We're going to need to surround ourselves with a community of people that we very carefully selected, very intentionally chosen to help us. Oh, I may luck out sometimes and just find the right people. But how much more effective will I be if I set my mind to this? Because what I want to do is go to heaven. If you're here this morning, you're not a child of God, let me be your accountability partner for just a moment. It's time. It's time to repent. It's time to confess your sin. It's time to enter in the waters of baptism.